He's back. Tachibana Takashi, who has been described by one popular YouTuber as Japan's biggest idiot, is in the news again. This time, he's being credited with helping a scandal-tainted governor achieve a stunning come-from-behind victory. This is a story that involves alleged workplace harassment, the suicide of a whistleblower, and possible violations of Japan's election laws. It's also an example of how social media can be used to sway Japanese voters into believing that television and newspapers cannot be trusted, and the real truth is the one you find online by doing your own research. Hello, I'm Jeffrey Hall, and welcome to Japan Matters, a channel in which we discuss various matters related to Japan. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at a series of events that took place in 2024 in Western Japan. The governor of Hyogo prefecture, who was hit by a major scandal and ousted by a unanimous vote of the prefectural assembly, decided to run again, and he won, shocking the media and shocking most experts on politics. And so we're going to take a look at this story because it provides a very interesting picture into how the internet is impacting electoral politics in Japan and maybe even media trust as well. So let's start by rewinding and getting some of the details of the scandal. In 2021, Hyogo Prefecture elected a man named Saito Motohiko as its governor. Saito had previously worked as a bureaucrat for Japan's Ministry of Internal Affairs and was viewed by many as a talented administrator. It's not uncommon for former elite bureaucrats to transition into politics, and in this case, Saito ran as an independent, but he was clearly a conservative. He was supported by political conservatives, including some of the local LDP, and his reign as governor was relatively scandal-free until March of 2024. The whistleblowing scandal began when an anonymous letter was sent to media outlets and police and the prefectural assembly members alleging that Governor Saito was guilty of abuse of power and corruption. The governor responded by denying the allegations against him, and the prefectural government conducted a search looking for the source of the letter. They wanted to find the whistleblower, and it didn't take them long to find out it was the Director General of a regional government office who was due to retire that month. It sounds like the whistleblower was extremely unhappy with the way Governor Saito ran the prefecture and may have thought he'd be able to retire and avoid blowback from the letter. However, that didn't happen. The prefectural government prevented him from retiring and made statements suggesting the man committed illegal acts. The man in question has been called a whistleblower, but he did not file his letter through official government channels at first. It was only after his retirement had been prevented that he appealed to the prefectural government's whistleblowing section, but he wasn't granted whistleblower protection. Instead, the prefectural government under Governor Saito conducted an in-house investigation into the whistleblower's conduct and came to the determination that some of the allegations were untrue and punished him with a 3-month suspension. From this point on, the scandal became much more serious. Politicians in the prefectural assembly did not trust the in-house investigation conducted by prefectural officials. It wasn't very open. They didn't really know how this decision was made. So they launched their own investigative committee to delve into the truth behind the allegations. And the whistleblower was due to appear before the committee, but in July 2024, the man was found dead in an apparent suicide. And the whistleblower left a note that reportedly said something along the lines of, "I will protest with my death, and I want the investigative committee to carry this through to the end." Even though the investigation into the whistleblower's allegations was still ongoing, various domestic media outlets condemned Saito's failure to protect the whistleblower. On the left, the Communist Party's newspaper, Akahata, described the situation in the following manner. After being accused, Governor Saito harassed and verbally abused the whistleblower, a former head of the prefecture's Nishi Harima office, calling the former head a liar and disqualified public servant. The governor took disciplinary action against him. It is absolutely unforgivable that the governor abused his power to drive the whistleblower to suicide. Here's another example from more to the political right. This is an editorial in the Yomiuri Shimbun, Japan's biggest newspaper, and it raised questions about the legality of the prefectural government's actions, stating that the whistleblower protection law prohibits any mistreatment of whistleblowers due to their whistleblowing. The prefectural government should have treated the official as a whistleblower and protected him. The prefecture's handling of the matter is suspected to have violated the law and can only be called inappropriate. Media reporting on the scandal increased as the investigative committee began to gather and release more information it had received from interviews with prefectural government employees. Though there were allegations about corruption, gift giving, and other things leveled at the governor, two particular allegations seemed to get the most attention and led to criticism of the governor. The first allegation was that the governor and his administration had rushed to punish the whistleblower instead of protecting him. This idea that the whistleblower needs to be protected, and many believed that this lack of protection had caused the whistleblower to be driven to commit suicide. The second allegation was that the governor mistreated government employees and maintained a hostile working environment. Japanese discussions of Saito's alleged mistreatment of prefectural employees often use the term power harassment, which is often shortened to pawahara in Japanese. This is a term that has become popular in the last 20 years as Japanese society became less tolerant of toxic working environments. The term is often translated into English as workplace bullying, but it covers a broad array of abusive behavior that could occur in workplaces. This image here, which I found through a search of the keyword pawahara on the Japanese clip art website Irastoya, shows a classic example of a boss shouting at an employee. Here's another illustration I found through the same search. In this variation, the artist depicts words like a physical punch. It represents the emotional and psychological damage inflicted by workers suffering from power harassment. This illustration shows the isolation that workers feel when subjected to power harassment. Power harassment can include punishments that seek to single out or separate a person from coworkers or subject them to public embarrassment. It can also involve cutting into a worker's private time by demanding that they engage in work late at night or on holidays. Here's another visual representation showing varying degrees of a boss expressing anger at an employee. According to information that's been released about the investigation into Saito, it sounds like he's done things that are worse than the boss on the left. So let's go over a list of some of the allegations of power harassment that were leveled at Governor Saito via testimony to the Prefectural Assembly's investigative committee. First off, shouting at government workers, berating them when he didn't like how fast they were doing their jobs or how they were doing their jobs. It also involved furiously pounding his desk. He also engaged in this in public in some ways by reprimanding staff members in front of outsiders. And there was throwing of stationery at government workers, according to some witnesses. And then there was also the issue of cutting into the private time of workers through late night and holiday texts demanding that employees do work on their time off. Various allegations were reported by the media. Here is one specific example, the so-called 20-meter incident. Prefectural government employees reported about a case of power harassment when Saito made an official visit to the Hyogo Prefectural Archaeological Museum. The governor allegedly became outraged that he couldn't get a special parking space near the entrance of the museum. When he found out he had to walk from the regular parking lot to the building, a distance of 20 meters, he allegedly became incredibly angry and berated his staff for not arranging special treatment. The investigative committee also conducted a survey of prefectural government employees, finding that 140 people had either directly witnessed or been targets of Governor Saito's power harassment. another 2,711 respondents reported learning about such incidents either directly from individuals involved or secondhand. Combined with direct witnesses, this amounts to 2,851 individuals, or over 40% of the respondents who were aware of alleged harassment. That is a lot of people. As pressure mounted on Governor Saito, he admitted to some instances of reprimanding workers, but he said it was part of his normal duties as governor. He didn't call it power harassment. He didn't give in to the suggestions that he was doing something very, very wrong. And this led to more negative media coverage. It led eventually to the resignation of his deputy governor, and some prefectural assembly members started pushing for Saito to resign. Media coverage began to question why political parties were not denouncing Saito's behavior. The LDP, which held quite a large number of seats in the assembly, began to call for his resignation, and then later they were joined by another of the large parties in the assembly, the Ishin Party, and in September 2024 they called for a no confidence resolution, and this passed unanimously. That means that everyone, from the far left communists to the most far right of politicians, voted demanding that Saito step down. And he had to step down because it was a no confidence vote. So a new election for governor was called, but this was before the prefectural assembly had released its final report on the allegations against Saito. It's kind of bizarre timing, and as we'll see, it caused Saito and his supporters to question some of the allegations that were against him because there was no final report out yet. And the investigative committee decided to continue behind closed doors to not influence the election result, a decision that would also cause some mistrust. So now we've seen the background leading up to how Saito was ousted and why there was going to be an election campaign. But now let's look at how that campaign went down. Saito's election strategy was rather simple. He would rebrand himself as an underdog who was fighting alone against the vested interests, or what we might call the establishment in English. And he was going to reach out to voters using social media. This is very important because he wanted to bypass the mainstream media. Soon after Saito was ousted by the no confidence vote, he began a PR campaign that depicted him as sorry about the disruption caused by the scandal, but confident in his ability to continue leading. Cameras were on hand to capture scenes of him alone at train stations, bowing to pedestrians as they passed by. Videos of a child thanking him and a 100-year-old supporter coming out to cheer him on went viral, and anti-Saito netizens were convinced that some of these videos were staged. It was certainly very convenient that cameras were on hand to capture this. After the election, it was revealed that a PR company called Merchu was involved in the Saito campaign. The head of this company wrote that she'd spent a month and a half conducting strategic PR work for Saito. She shared an image of a 3-phase plan for increasing Saito's social media following and to mobilize supporters by delivering Saito promoting content in the weeks leading up to the election. She also mentioned using various slogans and hashtags to help spread a positive message about Saito. From the article, it sounded like she spent long hours managing Saito's social media accounts and received the help of digital volunteers. After the official start of election campaigning, videos and photos circulated of high school students thanking Saito for his service. One viral social media post claimed that the students were thanking him for making prefectural high school tuition free. Another claimed that Saito had made his school cleaner. This is a remarkable thing for a Japanese election. Young people, especially high school students, rarely seem to care about politics, and the media took note of how these encounters went viral and increased Saito's popularity among voters. According to one Kansai TV report, the Saito campaign used a nationwide network of digital volunteers to help promote and spread clips of him on social media. One campaign volunteer told them that, "We upload videos and photos to Line. Digital volunteers, about 400 of them from all over the country, take that material, edit it, and post it on TikTok or YouTube. They come from places like Tokyo, Chiba, and Hokkaido. In other words, they're from outside of Hyogo. What's clear is that the reactions from high school and middle school girls shouting Saito-san with excitement were undoubtedly influenced by TikTok. These 400 digital volunteers across the country uploaded and shared videos of Saito's speeches on social media platforms. One supporter commented, "After watching YouTube and X, I felt like I could trust this person." Voters who are on social media such as Twitter and YouTube were being shown a very different version of Saito. Whereas the mainstream media had reported the details of the allegations against Saito, making him look like an abusive power harasser, social media posts were showing him as a nice guy who cared about the people. The monster that you'd heard about in the mainstream media was drawing the support of people who enthusiastically believed that he was nice. Many internet users came to believe that Saito was not a workplace bully, but was instead a victim of mainstream media bullying. Social media had helped create a narrative about Saito. A lot of people started to believe that he had started the campaign as a lonely underdog who hadn't been given fair media coverage. This was an enticing story, and as the campaign went on, Saito was drawing huge crowds. His social media people were very good at spreading the word about times and places he could speak, and they live streamed these speeches. And the level of enthusiasm at these gatherings was undeniable. You see lots of people clapping and cheering, something you rarely see at political speeches in Japan. This raises the question, though, of this image of Saito as the underdog versus vested interests. It seemed to work. The rebranding worked. And Saito, who had emerged as an elite bureaucrat with the support of people from the conservative establishment, was now seen as an underdog. He was from the vested interests, if you think about it, but to his supporters, he was not. And there were even some LDP politicians who were campaigning for him during this race. The establishment was out there campaigning for him, if you consider the LDP the establishment. However, there was something a bit more negative that helped Saito's campaign. This involved NHK party leader Tachibana Takashi, who you may remember from my previous video about his party spamming election poster boards in Tokyo by running multiple candidates. Tachibana had talked about doing something similar in the Hyogo election, so the prefecture responded by preparing a bunch of extra poster board slots at enormous cost to taxpayers. However, in the end, Tachibana decided he would run alone as an independent candidate. But he wasn't really independent. Although Tachibana was technically running as a candidate for governor, he didn't actually try to win the race. This isn't unique for a Tachibana campaign, so many of his other campaigns were gimmicks, but in this case, he used his campaign to promote former Governor Saito, telling people they should trust the former governor and not the mainstream media. Tachibana used his election poster slots to put up posters that did not feature his face or text promoting himself as a candidate. Instead, many of his designated poster slots were used to spread claims that were meant to make voters doubt the allegations against Saito. This is a picture of a poster board, where in the bottom left corner, you have Tachibana's poster without a picture of Tachibana on it. Here we have an image of the poster blown up a bit, and we can see that it has a huge headline declaring itself to have a scoop about the real reason why the whistleblower committed suicide. It's a short article alleging that the suicide was actually because the government worker's computer contained evidence of illicit sexual relations with female coworkers. He declared that the Japanese people were being brainwashed by TV news and should go on the internet to find the truth. Tachibana ended this short article with a line telling people, Please do not vote for Tachibana Takashi. Tachibana based his claims on a leaked recording from the Prefectural Assembly's investigation into Saito. The investigation had been proceeding behind closed doors so that it would not interfere with the election. But somebody provided Tachibana with a short audio clip of the deputy governor testifying before the committee. He told the committee that their check of the computer that belonged to the whistleblower who committed suicide included a discovery of an affair journal that documented multiple extramarital affairs. The committee chairman, Mr. Okutani, could be heard telling the deputy governor to stop speaking about the topic because it is a private matter. The clip would be spread online by Tachibana and other alternative media outlets, almost none of whom noted that the investigative committee had rules against private matters, rules that had been set in advance. So the prefectural government had the man's PC since March. They probably knew about this so-called affair diary if it existed, but they hadn't mentioned it until the hearings were taking place behind closed doors in a situation where audio could be selectively leaked to someone like Tachibana. Tachibana's official public broadcast election speech was a pro-Saito rant that claimed that there was no real power harassment and that the whistleblower had actually committed suicide because of his alleged extramarital affairs.
なんと、不倫してたんですよ、不倫。しかも、10年以上もやってた。しかも、なんと1人や2人じゃないですよ。複数人の女性と、しかも、もちろん県庁の女性職員とも不倫してました。不倫ですよ。10人ですよ。10年間ですよ。こんなことがばらされたくないから、県民局長は自殺したと考えるのが普通ですよ。パワハラなんてもともとなかったんだから。
It caught the attention of a lot of people, but it was speculation. There's also a clip of Tachibana basically admitting he didn't have much evidence for the 10 women claim that you saw in that clip there. Throughout the campaign, the mainstream media did not report on Tachibana's claims, likely out of respect for the privacy of a deceased person and their family, but this media silence convinced many people that the truth was being hidden from them. The leaked audio clip also referenced an allegation that the whistleblower had written on his work computer that he wanted to overthrow Governor Saito. The word coup d'etat was used. Tachibana claimed this alleged political motivation made it possible to not consider this a case of legitimate whistleblowing. This claim was expanded to suggest that the whistleblower was part of a conspiracy to overthrow Governor Saito. Could it be that the establishment, the vested interests, was conspiring to bully Saito out of office? Tachibana's dubious claims were picked up and spread by popular YouTubers, such as Nakata Atsuhiko, who has over 5 million subscribers and received millions of views on his video introducing Tachibana's ideas. Tachibana was the perfect person to spread the affair theory. As a fringe figure who campaigned against Japan's public broadcaster, he could be presented as a non-partisan source that is outside the political establishment, and when people hear his name, they probably think of him as the entertaining NHK guy that they saw on YouTube, even though he's been friendly with the political right for many years. This was also an added bonus for the Saito campaign. The former governor could run a clean campaign in public, and he didn't need to speak about this allegation about extramarital affairs. Tachibana could go out on the streets and say bad things about the dead person, and Governor Saito could say, well, I'm not coordinating with him, so I have nothing to do with what Mr. Tachibana is saying. In fact, Governor Saito claimed that he wasn't even really aware of what Tachibana was doing during the campaign. One of the things Tachibana was doing during the campaign was making speeches in which he denounced the prefectural assembly members conducting an investigation into the allegations against Saito. The assembly member in charge of the investigative committee, Mr. Okutani, told the media that Tachibana gave a speech in front of Okutani's home, which also served as his political office, demanding that Okutani come out. He alleges that Tachibana's speech included a line to the effect of, "If I keep threatening Okutani, he might commit suicide, so I'll stop talking. A video clip of the speech has been circulating online. Okutani also said that his family was frightened by the speech, and Tachibana has since stated he will be suing Okutani for defamation. I don't know where this could go, but in the past, Tachibana has lost defamation cases filed against people who criticized him. You might wonder, why would Tachibana spend millions of yen running a campaign that he wasn't even trying to win? Well, he might have been motivated by a desire to spread the truth, what he claimed in his speeches, but there could be other reasons. Tachibana has a history of doing bizarre things that generate attention, YouTube views, and financial donations from supporters. In this case, Tachibana said his 3 million yen election deposit was covered by a company president who runs a popular business YouTube channel called Reiwa no Tora. If this is true, Tachibana was able to generate enormous amounts of attention to himself without spending much of his own money. It worked out well for Tachibana. According to a report compiled by Netcomu, he appears to have benefited greatly in terms of YouTube video view counts. His videos related to the election received over 14 million views during the 2-week campaign period. That is a huge amount of exposure. The same report also noted that several large and influential YouTube channels helped spread pro-Saito views, including Tachibana's claims about the whistleblower's suicide. Another interesting piece of information from this report was that some YouTube channels that had previously devoted themselves to topics such as gaming or gardening started making pro-Saito videos during this campaign period. I'm not sure if Tachibana's channels are monetized, but a lot of the other channels that introduced his claims were. When a particular political controversy is going viral, it makes sense for content creators, both large and small, to make videos about it. It's profitable. In the case of Saito, this was a politician who was already gaining an internet following, so having him as a guest on a show or making videos about him, or videos about Tachibana's salacious claims, could draw views from his fans and generate profit. Prior to the campaign, anti-Saito netizens noted that there was a political content creator ad on the job recruitment site Crowdworks. It offered a work-at-home opportunity for people who could write videos for an unnamed politics channel, and they wanted about 200 videos a month. The ad mentioned the names of 2 politicians they'd be creating content about, Governor Saito and a man named Ishimaru Shinji. Ishimaru Shinji is a former mayor who went viral on social media over selectively edited video clips relating to his confrontation with an assembly member over an incident in which he was scolding this person for sleeping on the job. One of my previous videos on this channel explored the case of Ishimaru and his rise from obscure local politician to second-place finisher in the Tokyo gubernatorial election. Many people have compared Ishimaru with Saito, and it seems like Saito's campaign team aimed to replicate Ishimaru's social media style. They had some success in promoting a simple story like Ishimaru's story about a maverick politician facing off against the old political establishment. It could also be said that there was some overlap among Ishimaru and Saito supporters' views on whether politicians should be condemned for verbally berating people. If you're interested in learning more about Ishimaru, please check out my earlier video on the topic. So we've seen how this swell of online support was built up for Saito. Now let's break down his victory and see some of the reactions to it and what this might mean for the bigger picture in Japanese politics. When the votes were counted on election day, Saito pulled off a stunning victory. Voter turnout was 14 points higher than the 2021 election. Usually higher turnout is good news for the opposition, but in this case, Saito pulled off a rather big victory over the opposition-backed candidate Inamura. There was also another conservative candidate named Shimizu, who had the backing of the Ishin Party and also part of the LDP, but another part of the establishment LDP backed Saito. Exit polling showed that Saito had won only some of the votes of LDP supporters, but a huge segment of the much larger block of voters who aren't committed to any party. This is a kind of unique feature of Japan, that there is a block of 30 to 40% of the electorate that doesn't have any party allegiance, but Saito won them over quite well. In the graph, the orange lines represent support going to Saito, and the blue lines represent support going to opposition candidate Inamura, whereas the gray lines represent the failed efforts of the conservative alternative to Mr. Saito, Shimizu. One of the most interesting data points to come from election polling was NHK's report of 30% of voters getting their news from social media, and over 70% of this group voting for Saito. Although some early reactions focused on how exit polls showed a large portion of younger voters voting for Saito, he won most of the working age vote and even about 40% of retirement age voters' votes. It would be an oversimplification to say that this is merely the result of young people getting their news from YouTube and older people getting their news from television and newspapers. For example, a post-election article in the magazine Aida emphasized the fact that in 2024, elderly people like watching YouTube, sometimes more than they like watching TV programs. It says that daytime television news and variety programs, known as wide shows, are not engaging to elderly viewers. Author Suzuki Daisuke, who wrote a book about how his elderly father was radicalized through consumption of YouTube videos, is quoted in the article saying, "Variety shows often feature over-the-top performances, loud music, and fast-paced discussions among guests, which can overwhelm elderly viewers. While much has been said about young people abandoning TV, I believe TV is also failing to engage older audiences." One Japanese journalist pointed out after the election in a viral tweet that street interviews with voters showed that some Saito supporters suffered from what he calls information deficiency. As an example, he pointed to a man in his 60s who told a television program that he thought that Tachibana was saying credible things about Saito. He trusted that there was evidence proving these claims, and he believed this suicide theory. When asked if he'd seen the actual evidence Tachibana talked about, the man said he had not. But he was looking at things as a whole to make his judgment, and this might seem like cherry picking by the mainstream media, but a lot of the TV reports I viewed on various channels after the election featured similar street interviews of people praising Tachibana or saying that they'd found the truth online and they didn't trust the mainstream media. Here's another reaction from a user on Twitter where they lament how savvy populists and businesses can use YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and other social media to spread emotional content that popularizes an internet truth that is not the real truth. The term used in the previous tweet was netto de shinjitsu, or online truth. It's a term used to criticize people who find the so-called truth on the internet and do not trust contradictory information that is provided by mainstream media or academic researchers. This term was trending on Twitter after the election result was announced because some people, particularly those who thought that Saito should have lost, reacted by calling this a victory for online misinformation. Tachibana's claims became very popular because they involved a leak that was only discussed online. This wasn't being shown in the mainstream media. The mainstream media was obviously avoiding the topic, which heightened feelings of distrust towards the mainstream media was obviously avoiding the topic, which heightened feelings of distrust towards other things it had reported about Saito. If they're hiding this, can we really trust them about the other things they're saying? Former Osaka Governor Hashimoto Toru, who regularly appears on TV programs as a commentator, has said he thinks that Saito is unfit to serve as governor because he failed to extend protection to the whistleblower. However, he's also criticized the way the media failed to respond to Tachibana's allegations about the whistleblower's suicide. Hashimoto said the following in a post-election TV appearance. Various production teams at major media organizations decided not to report or touch on it. But in the world of social media, they exposed everything, accusing television of hiding the truth. Psychologically, and in politics as well, the worst thing you can do is give the impression that you're hiding information. That destroys trust entirely. Another take comes from politics journalist Azumi Akiko, who criticized the mainstream media's coverage of the election, arguing that their restrained election campaign reporting, which is meant to be fair, actually provides an opening that internet media can exploit. She wrote, "This phenomenon can be partly attributed to voters actively seeking information. However, traditional media outlets like television and radio, which should provide balanced and accurate coverage, often begin self-restraining well before the election period in the interest of maintaining fairness. As a result, voters are left without sufficient information and increasingly turn to the internet, where no such restrictions exist. The online space, however, is rife with unverified information, much of it sensationalized for monetization purposes." While it is said that digital literacy among internet users is improving, some individuals still take such information at face value. This leads to the conclusion that television, radio, and newspapers, which do not cover these truths, must inherently be corrupt. So why do Japanese TV networks have such restrained election coverage? Well, it's because unlike internet media, they're legally obligated to be politically neutral. This is similar to the legal situation that existed in the United States prior to 1987, in which broadcast networks operated under the so-called fairness doctrine. This is most visible during the 2 weeks of campaigning that takes place prior to Election Day, when networks in Japan tend to avoid critical coverage of candidates and political parties. It's often very boring and it feels superficial. This extends to extremist candidates who spread conspiracy theories and misinformation. TV news shows rarely seem to call them out or try to debunk their claims. They'll just present a short clip of them saying something normal, and they won't even mention about all these strange things that they are trying to promote. This raises the question, should the mainstream media have addressed Tachibana's claims? He was spreading unverified claims about a government employee who had committed suicide after being denied whistleblower protection. If they'd mentioned Tachibana's claims, they'd face the ethical problem of possibly violating the whistleblower's privacy or hurting the feelings of his family by airing this unverified claim. This could have also been seen as possibly being unfair because it was a selective leak aimed at making people doubt Saito was to blame for the whistleblower's suicide. This also raises questions about whether the media should be giving attention to random, unproven claims that can be found online. There are countless conspiracy theories on the internet. Do they all deserve news coverage? It's possible that newsrooms weren't fully aware of just how much ground Tachibana's theories were gaining online. However, being silent about what Tachibana was saying didn't work, and many people lost trust in the media as a result. Television media's reluctance to confront the issue of online misinformation may be influenced by increasing pressure from Japan's ruling party. Since the Abe years, networks that have aired critical coverage of the government have been reminded by LDP politicians that they must be fair in their coverage. Some would argue that this has caused networks to engage in more self-censorship, although it could also be argued that the government actually hasn't tried to act on these implied threats of penalizing networks that criticize them. TV media's reluctance to strongly criticize politicians may be influenced by increasing pressure from Japan's ruling party. Since the Abe years, networks that have aired critical coverage of the government have been reminded by LDP politicians that they must be fair in their coverage. Some would argue that this has caused networks to engage in more self-censorship on all political topics, although it could also be argued that the government hasn't actually acted on implied threats of penalizing networks that criticize it. Nonetheless, a recent TBS News report observed that politics coverage during election campaign periods has been in decline, both in terms of time allotted and quality of reporting. This might be another factor that is driving people to consume internet media. I will include a link to the report in the video description for those who are interested in watching it. I started working on this video the day after the Hyogo election. At the time, I thought it would be a video that focused on how candidates can use social media to create narratives around themselves that are very different from the narratives one sees in the mainstream media, maybe even recreate themselves into something that is an alternative reality. But now, more than a week after the election, things are going in a very different direction. It looks like some campaign laws may have been violated. Some people could be arrested. Maybe even the entire social media campaign that I was talking about wasn't exactly legal. And this means, in a worst case scenario for Saito, the entire election could be voided and he could be knocked out of office, triggering a totally new election. How is this possible? It's possible because Japanese election campaign laws are strict, extremely strict by international standards when it comes to how you use money, who you can pay, and what activities are allowed and not allowed. Remember when I talked about the PR company president who said she contributed to the Saito campaign's social media strategy? If she or her company were paid money to do the month and a half of work she wrote she was involved in, it could be considered bribery under Japanese law. Political campaigns are only allowed to pay people for very simple tasks. Almost all campaigning must legally be conducted by volunteers. The company president's blog post about her campaign work went viral after she posted it, as many people pointed out that you cannot legally pay someone to develop and manage campaign activities. Paying a person or company to manage your social media strategy could be considered bribery under Japanese law. When Saito was asked about the PR company, he said it was only paid for design work. If they were just making poster and flyer designs, it would be considered legally okay. However, Saito's claims seem to directly contradict what the PR company president wrote in her blog post. Saito also denied that the PR company had been involved in developing or running the campaign's social media strategy. Many were quick to point out that the company president's blog post included a photo of Saito sitting at a table with the PR company and viewing a presentation about the campaign's social media strategy. It says it right there on the screen, social media strategy. Netizens also reviewed footage of Saito's speeches and campaign events and found that the PR company president was frequently right next to Saito, filming him with her phone. The angle of the filming corresponded to videos and photos posted on Saito's official social media accounts. This would suggest that the company president's claims about running the campaign's social media accounts are true. Following the emergence of the allegations, the company president's blog post was edited to delete text and anything else that could be interpreted as illegal campaigning. For example, phrases that emphasized her role in managing Saito's social media accounts were changed to make it sound like she was just spreading information instead of managing. Award-winning investigative journalist Suzuki Eto, who became famous for his work exposing ties between politicians and the Unification Church, has been documenting the edits made by the PR company. Here's another example. Its description of the presentation about social media strategy was changed so that it doesn't sound like the PR company proposed ideas. The new wording states that they were just explaining the social media strategy. If they were just explaining something that had already been decided by Saito and not proposing a strategy to him, maybe it would be legal. It is possible that the company president and any of her staff who helped with the Saito campaign will claim that everything outside of designing posters was volunteer work. Individuals are allowed to volunteer and perform unpaid campaign work in Japan. However, Viral posts on Twitter, as well as legal experts on television, have suggested that this could be considered a case of a company volunteering a specific service that it usually charges people for. This could be considered illegal bribery. Politicians aren't supposed to receive free stuff from businesses. Lawyer Nishiwaki Kyosuke, a frequent media commentator on legal issues who also makes YouTube videos, has discussed this topic. In a recent article, he outlined 3 points that the Saito campaign could make in its defense. First is that the campaign only paid the PR company for simple services, such as poster design. The second is that the Saito campaign did not pay for social media strategy advice and did not receive any proposals or advice from the company. The third is that the PR company president was exaggerating or lying in their blog post, taking credit for things that she and her company did not do. The blog post seems to contradict points 1 and 2 here, so they need to discredit it as a source of information. However, Nishiwaki thinks that it would be strange for the PR company president to lie about her role in the campaign, a move that could damage her reputation and career as a PR professional. So, what if Saito is found to violate election laws? Violations of the Public Offices Election Act related to bribery are serious offenses, punishable by up to 3 years of imprisonment or a fine of up to 500,000 yen. In some cases, they may also trigger the linked liability system, leading to the invalidation of the candidate's election. This means that Saito could have his election invalidated, and there would be a new election in which he would be ineligible to run as a candidate. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Not every legal expert in the media agrees that Saito is facing legal trouble. Lawyer Kiyohara Hiyoshi accused the television-wide show Go Go Smile of misleading its viewers in its reporting on possible election law violations. He argued that if the PR company president and her workers volunteered their work for the Saito campaign, it wouldn't be considered illegal bribery unless it was proven they were seeking some specific reward from Saito, such as a government position or a contract. Pro-Saito netizens, who were already suspicious of the mainstream media, have been sharing clips of Kiyohara praising him for taking on the media. As allegations began to pile up, Saito's representatives announced they were going to release the invoices of their payments to the PR company. They claimed that the total amount of money spent was 700,000 yen, or about $4,500, and they claimed that the work performed amounted to legally acceptable design work, such as preparing poster designs, flyers, election bulletins, and policy slides. At the time I am uploading this video, it looks like they might claim that the PR company blog post was an exaggeration. Perhaps they'll argue that the photos of the social media strategy slideshow were actually the company showing them the design they'd made for the slide rather than slides they'd made about an idea. Regardless of whether or not the Saito campaign broke election laws, the PR company's blog post has caused some people to become highly critical of the claim that the swell of online support for Saito was organic. After all, a PR company was involved and it had a social media strategy that began on October 1st, right around the time we saw all these videos of Saito shaking hands with elderly people and little kids. Could that have been all part of a plan to manipulate people? There are also other legal issues that have emerged after the election. One involves Saito supporters who spread misinformation online. During the campaign, Twitter users claimed that Saito's opposition rival, Imamura, planned to grant voting rights to foreigners. This caused a stir among internet users, but it was not true. It was made-up information. Her camp has asked authorities to take legal action against the owners of several Twitter accounts, claiming that their malicious spreading of misinformation was a violation of election law. Imamura did not carry out a social media campaign comparable to Saito's, but she did try to make use of social media to spread information about her campaign. However, on 2 separate occasions, Twitter accounts affiliated with Imamura's campaign were suspended due to false user reports. It sounds like some users mass reported her accounts to get them frozen. And it has been announced that criminal charges will be filed against the owners of accounts that made the false reports. The people involved could be guilty of election interference. Another potential legal issue involves Mr. Tachibana of the NHK party. Earlier in this video, I mentioned he planned to sue an assembly member over allegations he threatened the man in a campaign speech. In 2022, Tachibana was convicted of illegally leaking NHK customer data and was given a suspended sentence of 2.5 years. Suspended sentences are Japan's equivalent of probation. You're allowed to go about your life, but if you violate the terms of that probation by committing another crime, you could have to go to prison and serve that sentence. If authorities were to treat his campaign speech as an actual threat, he allegedly described it himself as a threat, it's possible that it could lead to charges against him. However, it's also possible that authorities won't do anything about this, and Tachibana will get away with it.
You can't keep getting away with it! You can't keep getting away with it!
The ultimate question of whether any of the allegations I mentioned will result in an actual court case is up in the air. You've probably heard that Japan has a 99% conviction rate, and that's because prosecutors tend to be extremely careful about bringing cases to trial. If prosecutors believe they have a very strong case, they'll bring it to trial. However, if they investigate something and don't feel confident that the charges will stick, they'll often take no action. A recent example of this was the LDP slush fund scandal, in which many lawmakers who seemed to have broken the law were not charged because of a so-called lack of evidence. So it's still too early to predict how things will turn out with the allegations I just mentioned. I'll conclude this video by describing some of the major points that this case raises. One is that Japan is already beginning to experience post-truth politics that exist in many countries around the world. As people of all ages turn to social media to get their news, it is becoming easier for politicians and their supporters to spread online truth or alternative truths that are at odds with the truth being reported by mainstream media and other major institutions that abide by certain legal and ethical standards for reporting information. In this case, Tachibana's theory about an establishment conspiracy against Saito spread like wildfire across social media and may have influenced Saito's victory. The second point is that Japan's mainstream media, especially television media, needs to figure out how to deal with this online truth. Simply ignoring online misinformation does not appear to be working. It could also be said that political reporting during election periods is too restrained to deal with misinformation, and the restrained nature of such reporting makes it very boring, something that could make more people turn off their TV sets and go to YouTube for their political news. Another point that comes to mind is that Japanese election laws are confusing. I'm not saying this because I'm a foreigner. It's clear that many Japanese people are confused about what kind of campaigns are legal. There's a lack of agreement over whether or not Saito violated campaign laws. If it turns out that laws were violated, I wouldn't be surprised if the PR company president believed her actions were legally okay. After all, she wrote a blog post about it. But if it turns out no laws were violated, this becomes a case in which many people wrongly believe their country outlaws PR companies from giving free or paid help to political campaigns. One could also make a case that Japan's restrictive campaign laws might need to be changed. Is it really such a bad thing to be able to pay for PR advice during an election? Paying campaign staff or PR advisors is legal in many other democratic countries, so maybe it should be legal in Japan too. The fourth and final thought, upon which I will end this video, is that social media campaigning is emerging as an alternative to time-tested campaigning methods. These old methods, such as maintaining lists of local supporters and spending hours making phone calls to them, or going out onto the street and shaking hands, seem to be declining. Why shake hundreds of hands when you can shake a few dozen, film it, and spread it on social media to get a similar effect from thousands of people who are viewing it from the comfort of their homes? We can expect that many other politicians in Japan are going to try to emulate Saito's success. both in terms of social media use and in terms of weaponizing public distrust towards so-called vested interests or the establishment. So I'll wrap up the video here. If you liked this video and you want me to make more like it, please consider signing up for my Patreon. Any little bit of support will keep me motivated and keep me putting my free time into this channel. I really enjoy making these videos. It takes a lot of time, and if I know there's people out there who enjoy it, I'll keep making them. Also, please consider viewing my other videos if you haven't already. Like and subscribe, and as always, have a great day, everybody.